Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for tonight's public forum on school property tax elimination and reform. Special thanks to our hosts, Senator Martin, Senator Ament, for having us here in Lancaster County. Also been joined by my colleague, Senator Fulmer. I want to thank all of you for coming. I think we can all agree that our current school property tax system is in need of review. Many of us would tell you we believe it's rotten at the core and it's in need of elimination, but I'll let you decide on that. I certainly want to thank the two local senators for asking us to host this public meeting tonight with the Policy Committee. We're here tonight to look at options to reform and or to eliminate school property taxes. Also want to thank the Pequea Valley School District for allowing us to use the auditorium. We have a good cross-section of individuals representing various organizations that have a serious interest in school property taxes. We also have significant attendance, as you can see, from the public as well. I realize there are other places that you could have been tonight, and so I thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening to discuss this really important topic. Certainly in the district that I represent, not all that far from here in Berks County and Schuylkill County, I can't go a day without someone stopping me at the farmer's market or a Cub Scout meeting or the local Walmart without asking me about this issue. We're here tonight because we're looking for a solution to find a better way to fund our public schools. In order to do that, we need 26 votes in the Senate, we need 102 votes in the House, and we of course need the signature of the governor. It is easily the number one issue that I hear about in my district, and I suspect the same is true for my colleagues as well. Before I turn over the program to my colleagues, one simple request. In the last month, we've seen public discourse and politics sink to a new low. I'd like to think that tonight we could provide a good example for others to follow. And so whether you agree or disagree with something that you hear tonight, I would ask that you treat all of us, each other, with respect. We don't need to do name calling. We don't need to do some of the things that we see happening in other communities. And so we will have a segment for public comment and questions at the end. We may disagree on the details of school property taxes, but I don't think that we disagree on the ultimate goal. Again, let's make sure that all sides are heard with respect. Now, with that being said, I'd like to turn it over first to Senator Martin and then to Senator Ament for additional comments.
Well, thank you, Senator Argel, and first and foremost, welcome everybody to the 13th Senatorial District here in Pequea Valley. I want to say thank you to Pequea Valley High School and the school district for being gracious hosts tonight and allowing us to use their facilities, especially with all the activities that you saw going on outside. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Ament, who's been a great partner up there and has been a great partner in representing the interests of Lancaster County. We work very good together. I want to say another special thank you to Senator Argel and Senator Fulmer. Very quickly became apparent when I just got sworn in for my first term back in January, the passion that each of them have on this issue. And they work hard to try to get these types of reforms across the goal line. And listen, this topic I probably hear, and I'm sure my colleagues do, whether we have town halls, teletown halls, you name it, we get more questions about property taxes than probably anything else that we deal with. And in saying that, I'm going to just share a very quick story, if I may, because I actually dealt with it today. It was actually reported in the local media, a gentleman named Tom Goodhart, and he might even be here tonight. He said he might try to get here. Tom knows, I mean, he's battled Asperger's all his life. He lived with his parents since 1968 in the home that he was born. His parents, unfortunately, one at a time passed away. Tom could not hold down a job given his disability that he had. He had struggled, to pay his inheritance tax. and the house is continually now up for tax sale because he does not make the revenues. So I have a constituent that I'm working with that faces the prospect of losing his home because of not being able to pay property taxes. And it's very heartbreaking. We're trying everything we can do to work with him. You might have read the newspaper story. They call him Mr. McCaskey and volunteering there to help their sports programs. But this is where we need to be in having a conversation about it. We don't have enough votes yet to move property tax reform. But sometimes you start with a conversation and you listen to ideas. I don't think a single person in this room would not share the concern that, do we always trust our money going to Harrisburg and giving them more? Is it still going to be a fair funding formula that comes down? So we're going to have all kinds of ideas we'll talk about today. But again, thank you for being here and all our panelists, and it's good to have you here. Ryan?
Thank you, Scott. Good evening. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your willingness to bring this Majority Policy Committee hearing to Lancaster County. I think you can see from the turnout here this evening that this is an issue of great interest to residents all across Lancaster County. In the time that I have served in the General Assembly, first in the House of Representatives and now serving in the State Senate, there is no issue that comes close to this issue in terms of contact from constituents, whether that be email, whether that be phone calls, whether that be in-office visits, comments made at town hall events. No issue comes close to garnering the interest, the passion that property tax reform has the passion that has garnered. I did a little research earlier this session as this bill was being considered again, and there was an effort in the Senate, an ongoing effort to ensure that to deliver the votes, to come up with the votes that are necessary to pass property tax reform, property tax elimination in the Senate. And I looked, and the first property tax reform effort that I'm aware of in the state of Pennsylvania is from 1692. Remarkably, property taxes has been a source of great dispute since they were first authorized on January 30th, 1683, by William Penn, the proprietor and governor of Pennsylvania, and the 13 members of the provincial council. Within weeks of enactment, hundreds of complaints were filed with the provincial council regarding the assessment of property, and by 1692, several hundred landowners from the three existing counties at that time in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Bucks, and Chester, signed a petition to the Assembly listing their frustrations with the property tax and questioning the need for its existence. A chief complaint was that, quote, the excessiveness of the tax is placing an undue burden on estates, end quote. That was 1692. In 1776, upon Pennsylvania becoming an official state following the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, we enacted a state constitution which provided for a school or schools to be established in each county. One of the first pieces of legislation to be introduced in the new General Assembly involved how local schools were to be financed. Just as we're experiencing today, there was a great debate. Initially, the idea was to fund schools through a local property tax with the state funding 1/5 of the total cost. After months of disagreement, the Assembly decided to let the counties decide how best to pay for schools. So this has been a debate that we've been having here in Pennsylvania for over 300 years, and I think it points to the frustration that we hear from constituents on a regular basis. As Senator Argel highlighted, the goal is to work together to find consensus around meaningful reform that can garner 26 votes in the Senate, 102 votes in the House, and can be signed into law by our governor and provide you, the taxpayer, with meaningful reform and ensure that our schools are adequately provided for. I think it's important that we have our school districts as part of this conversation. I'm sure you will hear tonight frustration that our schools have with regards to many of the mandates that are placed on them that drive up the cost of doing business, whether that be prevailing wage, whether that be public sector pension obligations, whether that be special education funding. That is an important component of this conversation, in my view. So thank you very much for being here. I also want to make note of the fact, as I see them in the crowd, we have two of our colleagues from the House of Representatives in Lancaster County who are here this evening. Representative Brett Miller is here with us, and I saw David Zimmerman. Representative Zimmerman has joined us up here. If any of the other members of the delegation are here, try to wave at me, but appreciate their strong support for this effort. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ament. I've been working on this a long time, and there are days it feels like 1692, but not quite that long for me. Let's begin now by turning to my left to the Executive Director of the Senate Policy Committee, John Hopcraft, for a review of several of the different competing pieces of legislation that are currently proposed on this subject in front of the House and the Senate.
Good evening. When you all came in, you should have received 3 pieces of paper, one being the agenda. I'm going to be referring to the second 2 pieces of paper, listing several pieces of legislation as well as a headline that says referendum for all voting precincts within Lancaster County. If you would refer to those, we'll just go over them briefly. I'm not going to belabor the point on Senate Bill 76. You're going to hear a detailed presentation by Mr. Ron Boltz and David Baldinger on that point. The second bill listed on this handout, House Bill 1285. It was sponsored by Representative Dave Maloney. It's a constitutional amendment allowing for school districts, municipalities, and counties to exempt up to 100% of all primary homes from property taxes. Now, this is a constitutional amendment. It needs to be approved by the General Assembly in 2 consecutive sessions, then the voters. This past summer, the House and the Senate both approved this legislation for the 2nd consecutive session. So on this ballot on November 7th, you're going to see a question, and I'll read you the polling question you're going to see this fall. Shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended to permit the General Assembly to enact legislation authorizing local taxing authorities to exclude from taxation up to 100% of the assessed value of each homestead property within a local taxing jurisdiction, rather than limit the exclusion to 1/2 of the median assessed value of all homestead property, which is the existing law? Now, this legislation, if this constitutional amendment is approved by you, the voters, there would need to be legislation similar to Senate Bill 76 that would create a revenue source to pay for some sort of an exemption for homeowners. The second bill on the list, it's Senate Bill 356. It's sponsored by Senator Tomlinson, and there's a few of these bills on your list that provide for some sort of relief for senior citizens. Senator Tomlinson's bill would create a property tax freeze for seniors 65 years of age or older, and the legislation requires that the state pay for the property taxes lost due to the freeze for the senior citizens. This bill is currently in our Senate Finance Committee. House Bill 641, it's sponsored by Representative Seth Grove. It would create a optional municipal tax freeze for seniors 65 years of age or older with a household income of $60,000 or less, and the requirement that the resident be a resident of Pennsylvania for at least 5 years. We have Senate Bill 101 and 102, both sponsored by Senator Lisa Boscola. The Senate Bill 101 would redirect revenues from table games at the state's casinos into additional relief for school property tax relief. Currently, state taxes from table games go to the state's general fund. The bill is currently pending in the Senate Community Economic and Recreational Development Committee. And like I said, Senate Bill 102, another senior tax freeze, very similar to Representative Seth Grove's bill, but the income threshold is actually increased to $65,000 instead of $60,000. And then the final few bills we have, Senate Bill 586, sponsored by Senator Argel, and House Bill 1213, sponsored by Representative Kemp. They're the same bill in each chamber. It would ban taxing districts, which are your school districts, your counties, and municipalities, from being able to appeal a property's assessed value based solely on the sale of your property. And then finally, we have House Bill 1429. It's sponsored by Representative Jason Ortite. It's a bill known as the Property Tax Freedom Act. It would allow school boards to come up with revenue sources to either eliminate or reduce school property taxes by levying local occupation taxes, per capita tax, local services tax, a real estate transfer tax, amusement tax, and or tax on retirement income. And this bill is currently pending in the House Finance Committee.
Thanks, John. I suspect we'll be hearing a good bit more about many of those bills And we're going to begin with a review on the, I guess, the oldest of the whole list, Senate Bill 76 and House Bill 76. I've said it many times that when Ron and David came to see me shortly upon my election to the Senate with their plan as devised by a group of citizens from all across Pennsylvania, I think now totaling more than 80 different taxpayer groups, asking me to introduce this bill in the Senate for the first time. Representative Cox, your neighbor from Berks County, has identical legislation in the House. I've told them that my life has never quite been the same since the day that I said yes to that, and I haven't regretted it one moment. And so, David, Ron, if you would like to begin with the details of Senate Bill 76, the Property Tax Independence Act.
Thank you, Senator. I'm opening up this talk tonight about 76 because it's something that happened a few weeks ago. We had a similar town hall in Luzerne County, or rather, yes, Luzerne County, and Ron was a little bit late because of traffic on Interstate 80. That never happens. My name is David Baldinger, and I'm one of the leaders of the PCTA, the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Association. We're an affiliation of 87 nonpartisan, unpaid, volunteer grassroots taxpayer groups from across the state. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight and to learn about this very urgent issue for the people of Pennsylvania. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story, Senator Argall asked me to tell how this legislation came to be. I was in Senator Sam Rohr's district in 2004. He asked me at the time if I would be willing to help with some legislation he was working on to eliminate the school property tax. I agreed. I started working with him, and this went on 7 years until he ran for governor in 2010. And at that time, we turned it over to Jim Cox, who was his chief of staff and was elected in his own right to the House of Representatives. Jim and I worked together on this bill starting in December 2010, as did everyone else from the 87 taxpayer groups. And the way we'd work this, Jim and I would get together for 2 or 3 afternoons a week, discuss what needed to be done next on the bill. That evening, I passed it along either by email or by conference call to the rest of the members of the PCTA. We discuss it and decide how we wanted to handle it. We worked this way for more than 2 years, and we came up with the legislation. The thing about it is, it was everybody's work. It's our legislation. It's your legislation. It's the people's legislation, not a bill concocted by politicians and special interests. We did this, and this is ours. And this is done tonight to explain to you how the taxpayers and possibly misinformed officials make them aware of the fact and details of the Property Tax Independence Act. This is your legislation. Very unusual, and I think the lawmakers will tell you they've never seen this happen before in Harrisburg politics, where the people have actually done the legislation. No one in our organization has anything personal to gain from the passage of this legislation, and we promise you that unlike our self-serving lobbyist opponents, you will hear nothing but honesty about this plan that benefits no one but students, taxpayers, and the Pennsylvania education system. Ron Boltz is one of our dedicated volunteers and a former school board member, and he'll be giving you the presentation on the Property Tax Independence Act. Ron?
Thank you very much, David. Thank you to the Peckway School District and all of the senators here for having me. I've got a lot to talk about and a time limit, so I'm going to get started real quickly. What we're going to do is give a presentation on SB 76, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the current system, what the problems are with the current system, well, some of the fixes that were proposed to the current system that failed, and of course then our solution. I'm going to start you off with the first number you see up on the screen here is 30%. 30% represents about the approximate increase you could see, depending on what school district you live in your property taxes just due to the pension crisis alone. Now, you might have heard that there was recently a pension bill passed, but you need to be aware that that bill did nothing to address the current unfunded liability. So the point I'm bringing up here is that your property taxes will continue to increase because of the pension issue. That issue has not been resolved. 10,000 is about the approximate number of people in the state of Pennsylvania that lose their home to a sheriff's sale, not a foreclosure, but a sheriff's sale every year in the state of Pennsylvania, 10,000 because of property taxes. Now, a particular person, there was a Senate hearing, I always talk about this every time I do this, a hearing on SB 76 in the Senate, and a man by the name of Michael Wood of the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, when we were discussing this number, he testified that he didn't think that that was a significantly high enough number of people losing their homes to change the way we fund public education in the state of Pennsylvania. $1.5 billion. The IFO stands for the Independent Fiscal Office. I'm going to be referring to that quite a bit tonight. The IFO has done a study. It was just released, I think, January of this year, and they are predicting that if we do not change course, if we stick with status quo, the current property tax system, they are predicting actually over $1.5 billion annual increases across Pennsylvania in the property tax. That's if we stay with status quo, not if we pass 76, but if we stay with the current system. So let's look at the education finance reform and do a little overview. What are the real problems? Well, the current system is antiquated taxation system not based on accepted taxation principles. Simply stated, you heard a little bit of the history from Senator Allman earlier. The property tax was brought in long ago. We were mostly an agrarian society. Many people earned their living from the land. That is not the case today. Your home does not generate revenue for you. And of course, back then there was no IRS to determine how much everybody's wealth. So they figured, well, maybe taxing property, if you own more than your neighbor, maybe you're a little wealthier. And so, it might have made a little bit of sense back then. Today, it does not. And of course, not based on accepted taxation principles. That simply means that the property tax is in absolutely no way at all based on your ability to pay. It is not based on your income. It's based on an arbitrarily assessed value of your home, which can vary widely from district to district, and even within the district, it can vary greatly. It's also extremely regressive. And what do I mean by that? Well, simply stated, if we took everybody's income in this room and we reflected your school property tax bill as a percentage of your income, you will find that everybody in this room is paying a different rate. Everybody. It is far from a flat, fair tax. And the regressivity of it is we find that most often our middle class and lower class homeowners are the ones that are paying a much higher rate in many cases than our wealthier homeowners. Property taxes are inherently arbitrary and unfair. I probably don't have to elaborate much on that. That's why you're here, I'm sure. There is basically zero uniformity and fairness to the property tax system that we have today. And of course, the inability to pay the property tax equals the loss of your home. And that, of course, is the biggest tragedy of all. Out of control spending. We hear about this all the time. If you go to your school board and complain about your taxes, they're going to point the finger at Harrisburg. You go to Harrisburg, they may point the finger back at your school district. The fact is that there is plenty of blame to go around. There are some school districts that spend a little bit more than they probably should. Some do not. Some are more frugal than others. But there are unfunded mandates passed down from Harrisburg that your school district must pay. They don't have a choice. So there's really a lot of blame to go around, and each side does have a point, but each side is also to blame. Lack of effective education cost controls. We currently really have none. Back in 2006, Act 1 came about, and this was Harrisburg's attempt to introduce spending controls. And basically what they said was we're going to issue an index every year, and the school districts cannot raise above that index unless they go to the voters for approval via referendum. The problem is that they granted exceptions to get around the referendum. And in those exceptions are grandfather debt, special education costs, and of course pensions, which currently is the biggest cost driver. So the result of this is every year we see school district after school district filing for exemptions, raising taxes to the index, and getting approval from Harrisburg to go even above the index. I have yet to hear of a single school district that was denied to raise above the index. And even the index in my district this year was 3.5%, which even of itself is fairly steep. I didn't get a 3.5% raise last year. Education and taxation inequities. That's the state sends out revenue unequally through a distribution formula. Some districts get almost 80% of their funding from the state. Others get, as little as 20. And so that creates a lot of funding inequities as some districts have to rely more heavily on property taxes than do others. The projected cost of education. Here's one of the most important things that I'm going to talk about and show you tonight. This is a chart taken from the Independent Fiscal Office review of SB 76 back in 2013. And at the top, it says cumulative growth in property taxes, average weekly wage, and CPI, which is inflation, consumer price index, over time. They looked at the time period from 1993 to 2013, and this was the chart that they came up with. That top line that's going up, the black line, that is your property tax increases over that 20-year period. That represents 146%. The middle dotted line that you see, it's green on the screen, that is average weekly wage growth. That's what folks across Pennsylvania on average are seeing as increases to their paychecks. That line represents about an 80% increase over that time. And the bottom dotted line, the red one, that is CPI inflation, that's 59%. So clearly we see property taxes are rising at significantly more than twice the rate of inflation and almost twice the rate of wage growth. I mentioned earlier that the IFO prediction of $1.5 billion annual increases going forward. This is just simply the chart taken directly from that IFO report. So the short answer is this: we have an irreparably broken K-12 public education finance system, and the common myth we hear very often is property tax relief or property tax reform is the solution, and we say that it is not. Well, why is it not the solution? Well, what's wrong with property tax relief? On the screen, you're going to see a couple of past attempts by Harrisburg to address this problem, and none of them were effective. Act 50 and Act 72 were rejected by school boards, and I believe it was Act 1 rejected by the voters. What they attempted to do was shift from your school property taxes to other forms of local taxation. The problem was neither of those two plans eliminated the school property tax. It was just a reduction. The voters realized by the margin of 494 of the 498 eligible school districts, the voters in those districts voted it down because they understood that any reduction is just temporary. You're going to have those other increased taxes. Your property tax would just continue to go up beyond where they were before, and now you have those other taxes to pay on top. So they recognized it really for being a tax increase, not a tax reduction. HB 1189 was Representative Grove's bill. In the past, it was an attempt to shift locally from school property taxes to 3 different business taxes. The biggest problem with that bill was that it wouldn't work in many school districts that don't have a big business tax base to shift to, and really, do you want to do that to your business community anyway? Act 1 rebates is the gambling relief. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. It did not come anywhere close to amounting to what we were promised. The Wolf Plan and the Sailor Plan, when the current governor came into office, he put forward a plan. They were claiming a 50% reduction. The way the plan would have worked was an increase of the income tax and the sales tax. It would have generated about $8 billion, but it would have only given back about 3.6 to property tax relief. It currently takes, for complete elimination, somewhere near $13 billion to completely eliminate the school property tax. So 3.6 obviously is not half of 13, so right off the bat, you know it wasn't going to give you a 50% reduction. But what was worse, it was going to use a formula to drive the money out. And we found through a study that at the bottom end, one school district was only going to get about a 15% reduction, and there was another district that made out like a bandit. They were going to get about 306%. So they would have gotten triple back what they actually were currently paying in property taxes, and everybody else was funding not only their own school now, but now they were helping to fund select other schools around the state. So this is why we're saying any property tax relief plan is doomed to failure if the system is not reconstructed, and that's why we, 76 proponents, say we want no more relief, no more reform, no more reduction. We want the school property tax replaced. So this is what we feel like, as you heard Senator Allment talk about earlier. It goes back even further than I was aware of, this fight against the property tax. But we're going to continue to fight, and we're going to get something done. Why is now the time for change? Well, rising homeowner discontent. I probably don't have to explain that either. We hear from some senators that, well, this is just a regional problem. It's not a problem everywhere. We go all over the state, door to door, talking to folks, and we find that it is really a problem everywhere. The only question is, to what degree is it a problem? Act 50, 72, Act 1 failures. The gambling revenue, I talked about that earlier. That basically amounted to little or nothing for most folks. Pressure from taxpayer groups in the media, and diminishing opportunity to fund property tax replacement from a state-level source. This is a very important point, and you heard a little bit of the history from Mr. Baldinger earlier. The current plan goes back to about 2004, although there were previous efforts, but this kind of got to where we are today from the effort started by Sam Rohr and I believe Mario Scavello up in the Pocono area. And back then, they could have completely eliminated school property taxes with nothing more than an expansion of sales tax base to include more items and services, and he could have actually lowered the sales tax rate from 6% to 4.25%, and the legislature did not do it. Today, we need a mix of an increased sales tax, an expanded base, and an increased income tax to completely eliminate your school property taxes. So the point I'm trying to make is, if we keep going and dragging our feet longer and longer and longer, every year we wait with that $500 billion predicted annual increase, that's more and more replacement revenue every year that we're going to have to come up with to replace your school property taxes. We are on a time crunch to get this done. Why now is the time for change? April 2017, Arizona State University job growth ranking for Pennsylvania put us at a pretty bad 36th out of 50 states with a growth rate of only 0.65%. United Van Lines, every year, the moving company, they do the National Movers Study to look at in-migration and out-migration in the 50 states, and they put us at 10th in out-migration, meaning there's only 9 states that people are leaving from faster than Pennsylvania. We have a 44% inbound, but a 56% outbound. That's a 12% difference. Why are people leaving, and who's leaving? Well, it's mostly young folks are leaving. They go through college. We pay to educate them here in our public education system, sometimes through public taxpayer-subsidized colleges, and they leave and get jobs in other states, and other states get the benefit of the education that Pennsylvania taxpayers provided for them, and they go to pay taxes in other states. They're leaving because, well, as you see above, they're having a hard time finding jobs, and our taxes are too high. Depending on what study you look at, Pennsylvania is about the 10th highest tax burden in the country. It's not our income tax. Our 3.07% income tax is actually pretty low if you compare it to surrounding states especially, and other states across the country. It's actually a bright spot. It's not our 6% sales tax. That's about normal. It is the property tax is the biggest problem in Pennsylvania. And of course, our corporate tax is very high as well. Why else is now time for change? The Tax Foundation did a study, Location Matters, a comparative analysis of state tax costs on businesses. Report for Pennsylvania put us at 49th out of 50th. 49th out of 50th for bringing in new firms to the state, more jobs in other words. And we're 50th out of 50th for retaining the jobs and the mature established firms that we already have. So again, the bottom line is runaway property taxes are destroying our economy, devastating our job-producing small businesses, and of course, driving away our residents. And the best thing that we've come up with to tackle this problem so far is KOZs and LRTAs, if you're familiar with those. It stands for Keystone Opportunity Zone. That's a program where we give tax abatements to try to draw in businesses to our state. We say, okay, we're going to give you a 10-year tax abatement or lower taxes that go up slowly over those 10 years. Just please come to our state and establish some jobs. Clearly, if we have to offer KOZs and LRTAs and all these other tax abatements to bring in business, we're obviously admitting we have a property tax problem to begin with. And we're saying, let's treat everybody fairly. KOZs do not treat people fairly. They unfairly give an advantage to one business to come in and compete directly against another business who may have been in the community paying property taxes to your school district for decades. We're saying let's stop this nonsense. Let's treat everybody fair. Let's eliminate the entire tax for everybody and make the entire state a KOZ. Here's a sign that I saw up in the Poconos. I'll just mention it briefly. It says LRTA approved. So now they're pre-approved. That's a vacant piece of land in the Poconos across the street from a golf course. And to sell apparently a vacant piece of land in the Poconos across from the country club requires an incentive to do so, because that's how bad their property taxes are up in that neighborhood. So the solution is replace the school property tax with a more broad-based, equitable funding stream, and that's where HB/SB 76 comes into play. So what are the goals of the bill? The goal, number one, of course, is the total elimination, not reduction, of the school property tax, to be phased in over a 2-year period. The first year, the funds would be driven into the fund, and the second year would be driven back out to the schools. It would be the total elimination of school board taxing ability with specific exceptions, and I'll talk about the exceptions in a minute, but for the most part, you would no longer have the current system where just 5 school board members could vote to increase your property taxes every year. Establish realistic limits on increases in K through 12 education spending. As I mentioned earlier, there currently are no real effective limits with Act 1. SB 76 absolutely enacts spending limits going forward, and I'll talk about that as well. Stabilization of school funding. Now, here's one that I need to spend a few minutes on. We hear from the opposition that we cannot shift away from the property tax to fund our schools because the income tax and the sales tax are, in their view, not stable enough. They say that the property tax is a stable form of funding. Well, the first question I always ask is stable for who? It's certainly not stable for the taxpayer, and really we don't think it's stable for the schools either. An example I always give is the GlaxoSmithKline some years ago did an assessment appeal on their property in Upper Marion School District. It was in the courts for 2 years. The courts awarded them a $2 million reduction. Now, of course, the school didn't just decrease its budget by $2 million. The school just raises taxes on everybody else to make that up. So I guess if you have that ability, maybe you would consider the property tax stable, but through the eyes of the homeowner, the property tax certainly isn't stable. Here's another chart taken from the IFO. It's actually very similar to the first one. And this one also charts personal income tax revenue and sales and use tax revenue over that same time period of 1993 to 2013. That top line, again, is your property tax increases. The red line that you see that goes up over time, that takes a couple dips down but does go up over time, that is the income tax revenue going into the state over that time period. As you can see, it does increase. The green line, the solid green line that you see down below that, that is the sales and use tax revenue coming into the state. Now, if you notice the very bottom line, the dotted line, that's inflation. So take notice that the sales tax revenue and the income tax revenue both stayed significantly above inflation, even during the 2008 economic downturn. That's what we hear often. You know, if we have an economic downturn, the income tax and the sales tax, they're not going to be stable enough to fund schools. Well, I think this chart tells a different story. And with the spending controls that are enacted in SB 76, they are absolutely very stable, plenty stable enough to do what we're trying to do here. But one other point I'd like to make here is that during this time period, you see that that income tax generates more and more revenue. Does anybody know how many income tax increases are represented in that red line? The last income tax increase in Pennsylvania was in 2004. And prior to that was, I believe, 1993, right at the beginning of this chart. So over that entire time period, there was only one small, relatively small, 0.27% increase in the personal income tax rate in Pennsylvania, but yet that source generates, without the need for constant tax increases, more and more revenue to the state. The sales tax has been the same since 1968. It's been 6% since then. But yet the state generates more and more sales tax revenue without the need to increase that rate. Now let's compare that to the black line, the property tax. How many tax increases do you think it took to prop up that black line and do what it's doing in this chart? Well, if you take 500 school districts across the state over 20 years, you literally have thousands and thousands and thousands, no exaggeration, of tax increases to make that black line do what it's doing. So I ask you, which of these taxes is the most stable? The one that requires thousands and thousands of tax increases to prop it up? Or the sales and income tax, the sales that didn't require any tax rate increases, and the PIT that only required one small one back in 2004? The revenue. The elimination tax swap for SB 76 must be tax revenue neutral. That means that we are not trying to generate any more revenue for any other purpose other than complete elimination of your school property tax. It is a dollar-for-dollar replacement of your existing school property taxes. What your school gets today in property tax revenue, it will get after 76 is passed, and there are increases going forward. So how does the bill work? Well, it works through a modern expansion of the sales and use tax base to include more items and services with exemptions for necessities. We still maintain exemptions for medical, dental procedures, fresh fruits, meats, dairy, heating oil, public transportation, prescription drugs. Items of clothing under $50 per item would remain tax exempt under 76, but it does expand it to other items and services. It's important to realize Pennsylvania currently has probably the lowest amount of items and services exposed to the sales tax of any other state. Every budget season, we seem to hear talk about expanding that sales tax base to include other items and services. Ed Rendell tried to do it right before he left office. The current governor has tried to do it to several different items. So my point is simply this: these things are going to become taxed at some point. It's going to happen. And what we're saying, well, let's do it now, but let's use this rather than giving it to the general fund. Let's use this to eliminate and take care of this school property tax problem. We also increased the rate of the sales tax from the current 6% to 7%, and an increase in the personal income tax rate from 3.07% to 4.95%. That is a 1.88 percentage point increase. It is 3.07 to 4.95% on the PIT. Now, most of you pay far more than 1.88% of your income, if you have income, towards your school property taxes. And as I'll discuss here shortly, even with the increased sales tax, most homeowners are going to be a financial winner under this plan. We throw the current Act 1 gambling revenue back into the pot, and there is a small retained property tax for long-term debt. And I have to explain this as well. This is the subject of much misinformation. Some legislators opposed to the idea of paying off the debt from a state-level source of some school districts that are really buried pretty badly up to their eyeballs, I always like to say, in debt. They say it's not necessarily fair if 76 passes to pay off that debt for them, while you have maybe a more frugal school district that's not, really heavily indebted, to not have its debt paid off or to be subsidizing the debt, so to speak, of other school districts. So basically the idea was then, okay, we're going to retain just enough property tax after 76 passes so the local residents would be responsible to pay off their existing debt. But what the bill does is it freezes that debt. It does not allow the school district to take out the debt for any longer term. It does not allow the school district to take out any more debt. It freezes it in place, retains just enough property tax to fund that debt service, and once that's paid off, then you'll get 100% elimination. And of course, the first question that you're probably asking right now is, well, what kind of reduction would I get in the meantime? Well, recently the PSBA had two gentlemen from the IFO. They did a webinar, and this question came up. And they testified Mark Ryan from the IFO said that they looked at this across the 500 districts in Pennsylvania, and they found that the average reduction would be about 82%. So now this is going to vary, there's 500 different answers to this, it's going to vary by district, but on average, you're looking at an 82% reduction and an 18% retained property tax to pay off that current debt service, and again, once it's paid off, it goes away completely. This revenue does not go into the general fund. The bill sets up what they call the Education Stabilization Fund. So you can see the revenue going into it, you can see the revenue coming out. There is nothing else going into or out of this particular fund. It's simply and solely for the elimination and replacement of your existing school property tax. We don't want to send it to the general fund where it can be used for something else, so that's why it goes to a different account. All districts, as I mentioned, will be funded fully dollar for total amount of local taxes eliminated. And there would be annual increases to all districts based on the percentage increase of the Pennsylvania average weekly wage or available revenue, whichever is less, allocated to each district equally on a percentage basis. So this question came up during the aforementioned IFO webinar with the PSBA, and they said, well, if we're going to restrict spending going forward and we're going to limit it to average weekly wage growth or available revenue, what can we be expecting? And Mr. Ryan said that in the short term, they would still be able to, he thinks, give a 3.2 to 3.3% annual increase to your school district. So the first year you get the same revenue you have in your current property tax. The next year you're going to see a 3.2 to 3.3% increase to that revenue, and the year after that the same. He predicted those rates in the short term. And keep in mind, that was predicted without increasing the personal income tax rate and without increasing the sales tax rate revenue, or the sales tax rate. And that is possible because, again, those two sources grow naturally over time without the need for constant tax rate increases, unlike the school property tax. There would be supplemental funding through a local EIT or PIT. So your district could levy a local earned income tax or personal income tax, except under SB 76, they would not be able to just vote with 5 board members to do it like they do currently with your school property tax. Otherwise, we'd be right back in the same boat again that we were before. All supplemental EIT or PIT would be subject to a no exception vote or referendum. And on the referendum, you must see what the project is, state what the purpose of the project is, the cost of the project, what the actual tax rate would be, and a sunset date for the tax. You would know exactly what the tax increase would be. You would know how long that PIT and EIT would last. It cannot go on indefinitely. For general district funding, there would be a mandatory referendum every 4 years for renewal of the tax. So, in other words, if the school district went to the voters and said, we would like to levy a local income tax for such and such a purpose, do you approve of it? If the voters voted up, it does not go on indefinitely. It lasts only 4 years. Then you have to approve it again 4 years later. It cannot just continue in perpetuity. This legislation is to be a replacement of local school district property tax only, and it is not to be integrated in any way with the current basic education subsidy. Right now, your school district gets 3 main sources of funding: your local school property taxes, revenue from the state, and also revenue from the federal government. This revenue, replacement revenue, does not get intermixed with either of the other two. Your current basic education subsidy is driven out with a formula. This revenue is not driven out with the same basic education formula that the current state subsidy is. It's very important to understand that the revenue, that the 2 sources stay separate even after 76 is passed. Legislation is in full fiscal compliance with financial analysis conducted by the IFO that I've been referring to quite frequently, that was released on October 1, 2013. And I'm going to read you a few things that were taken directly from that report. That report said, the elimination of school property taxes increases the disposable income of property taxpayers. The analysis assumes that 70% of the property tax cut goes to individuals. It further assumes that homeowners spend 90% of the increases in disposable income. Clearly, the first statement there, the first sentence says that eliminating the school property taxes increases the disposable income of property taxpayers, the homeowners. The analysis indicates the legislation will cause home values to increase on average by more than 10% statewide. Well, this is just common sense. If we remove hundreds of dollars per month of escrow payments or school property taxes that first-time home buyers, all homeowners have to pay, that makes home ownership more affordable. More people are going to be looking to purchase a home, which increases the market value, which of course gives us an increase in our home values. Working age homeowners realize a tax cut. The analysis finds that the increase in federal income tax, state income tax, and sales tax is more than offset by the reduction in property taxes. Simply stated, here's the second time that they say working age homeowners realize a tax cut under this bill. And they're saying that even with the PIT increase and the sales tax expansion, and even through not getting the lower itemized deductions because you won't have your property taxes to deduct from your federal taxes, you're still coming out a financial winner. And all of those increases will be more than offset by the elimination of the school property taxes. Retired homeowners realize a significant reduction in taxes. The analysis finds that the property tax reduction easily offsets increases from the higher sales taxes. Many of our seniors would only be exposed to the higher sales tax and the expanded sales tax if you're not exposed to the income tax. The elimination of property taxes would significantly reduce the property tax share and would clearly increase the attractiveness of the Commonwealth for business location and expansion. As I mentioned earlier, and you saw on the slide, we are really pretty much at the bottom of the barrel for bringing in new jobs and keeping the ones we have. We need more jobs. More jobs mean more taxpayers. As we're losing population, folks, you have to realize that as we lose more and more taxpayers, those of us that remain here have to pick up more and more of the burden. We need to reverse that trend, and the IFO is saying that this would clearly make the Commonwealth more attractive for business relocation to the state. Benefits would accrue to home builders, home developers, and other landowners who convert land holdings into new housing plots. That's more common sense. If you make home ownership more affordable, we're going to be building more homes. Regarding business entities, the income flows through to individuals as higher disposable income. Once again, it says that we're going to have more money in our pockets to spend. For pass-through entities, the analysis assumes that owners and shareholders spend 90% of that increase and 70% is spent on taxable goods, yielding another secondary effect of $34 million in increased sales taxes. Simply stated, you're going to have more money in your pocket. You're going to go out and spend that in the marketplace on taxable goods and services. That's going to be an economic benefit to Pennsylvania as well as our schools, because that sales tax revenue is going to go back. They're predicting an extra $34 million just from the increased economic activity that then gets turned around and put into the fund to give back to your schools. David already talked about the origins of the bill, so I will skip over that. He already mentioned that it's a clean bill. It's our bill. It's not a bill drafted by special interests. So up until this point, you say this all sounds great. So what are the objections? Why hasn't this gotten done yet? Well, I'm going to talk about a couple of the objections that we hear from the opposition. One of the biggest is loss of local control. The theory goes that if we pay for our schools from a state-level source and do not allow our school boards to increase taxes as they do now, we are going to lose, quote-unquote, what they call local control. We say that that is not going to happen, and that's nonsense for a couple of reasons. Number one, the bill does nothing to limit any type of decision-making locally by your school board. Nothing whatsoever. And we also would like to talk about the current situation. Really, we don't have much local control to begin with. If you see at the front of the stage there, those binders are all of the regulations that your school board must currently follow. We have Title 22 up there. We have the 1949 School Code, existing labor laws. We have Common Core. None of these things are voted on by your local school district. Common Core was not voted up or down by your local school district. And of course, the pension obligations that you are paying for through your property taxes that are increasing annually, almost annually in some cases, that is not something that your school board has made a decision to be involved in. They cannot get out of the pension obligation. So my point is simply this. We talk about all of this local control that we have currently. I say that those 3,000 plus pages of regulations say quite the opposite. It's largely a myth. And if we have local control, we wouldn't have a problem with this pension problem that we have right now. We also hear things like we shouldn't tax clothing, books, flags, or whatever. Some of the latest battle cries that we're hearing is we can't tax diapers or caskets. I would just ask you, would you rather be paying a sales tax on diapers for only the years that your children are in diapers? We figure that's probably maybe about a $28 a year in sales tax for diapers. Or would you rather pay ever-increasing thousands and thousands of dollars of property taxes for the rest of your life, and if you can't pay it anymore, they're going to come and take your home from you? So I think the choice is obvious here. And as far as things like caskets, I understand the objection to it, but I'm only going to die once, and so is everybody else. That's only a one-time tax rather than the constant, ever-increasing property tax. I'll take the tax on the casket. Thank you very much. The plan shouldn't eliminate for businesses. We heard earlier, I showed you earlier, again, the problem that we're in with trying to bring businesses into the state. Currently, we cannot eliminate for homes only because of the uniformity clause of the Constitution. And really, businesses just pass their property taxes down to the consumer anyway, whether we like it or not. So this would be an economic benefit to also eliminate for businesses, and it would really help our small businesses the most to compete more easily with our larger businesses. Before I get to the bottom two, there's a couple of others. We hear we have to control spending first. We say that this is nonsense. We've been asking for spending controls in many different areas for decades, and we still haven't gotten them. We're at the point now where we're simply saying, well, we're not going to ask for spending controls anymore because we haven't gotten them. So what we're going to do is we're going to enact spending controls and now force Harrisburg to enact spending controls. Maybe after this bill passes, they'll really look at the pension issue a little more seriously. Maybe they'll look at things like prevailing wage and some of these other unfunded mandates that some of the districts are complaining about, and maybe we'll get real reform to these issues when Harrisburg is paying the bill rather than you, the local property tax payer. The bill locks in the inequities. We hear this. I don't want to get, this will probably come up later, so actually I'm just going to skip over that one. If it comes up, I'll address it in the Q&A. The taxpayers will be paying more. You just saw the IFO repeatedly state that homeowners are going to be paying less. They'll have more disposable income. We see attempts from some of the opposition legislators to try to come up with a group. They try to group the taxpayers, and they'll say, well, the taxpayers in my district in this school will collectively be paying more, sending more to Harrisburg than we get back. And, they try to come up with these excuses to say that, taxpayers are going to be paying more. It's nonsense. Every homeowner is going to be treated exactly the same way, which brings me to the next objection is this bill creates new winners and losers. We hear, well, some people will be paying more with the increased income tax and the sales tax, and some people will be paying less, so this just creates new winners and losers. We say, no, the current system creates the winners and losers. As I mentioned earlier, your school property tax depends largely on where you live. Some districts rely much more heavily on this property tax than others. You could have a $200,000 home, say in Monroe County, that has a $12,000 school property tax bill attached to it, and a $200,000 home in Elk County that might have a $1,200 school property tax attached to it. So you see the variation there even on equal value homes. That's a winners and losers situation. That's the current system. SB 76 treats everybody in this room, every taxpayer, exactly the same way. Everybody pays that 1.88% PIT increase. Everybody pays the exact same sales tax rate on the exact same items and services. This eliminates the winners and losers. Are there going to be some people paying more? Possibly, but that person currently is benefiting at the expense of somebody else under the current system. So we're getting rid of the winners and losers argument. We're leveling the playing field for every individual taxpayer. Everybody's going to go to Delaware to do their shopping. We hear that from some of the Southeast people. I doubt everybody here is going there to do your shopping. I doubt you're going to do it with a 1% sales tax increase. And in fact, I looked into it and I found that there is a Target store in Pennsylvania in Concordville, and exactly 5.3 miles away, across the Delaware border where there's 0% tax, is another Target store. So if everybody's going to Delaware to do their shopping, why would Target build a store 5.3 miles away from that one on this side of the border, and how could it stay in business? Clearly, even the people down there aren't all going to Delaware to do their shopping. The numbers don't work. We hear that a lot, is that this bill does not generate enough revenue to replace the school property tax. That is nonsense. The IFO report confirmed that it does. We hear some misrepresentation about one particular chart in the IFO report that shows that over time, if we enact 76, the taxpayers would be paying less than they would if we stick with the current system. And our opponents kind of spin that a little bit to say that this underfunds the schools and it does not provide adequate funding. That is nonsense. That chart was nothing more than a comparison of status quo versus what would happen if we enact 76. The plan doesn't help those who rent. It does. Renters actually do pay property taxes indirectly through their rent. This chart was taken from the U.S. Census Bureau, and it was almost the same time period as the one I showed you earlier from the IFO report. And as you can see, this is median asking rent for vacant rent units. And you can see it's going up at pretty much the same rate as property tax increases. That's because landlords have to pass on rent increases to their tenants. I mean, it's just part of doing business. They can't provide housing and not make a profit. Otherwise, what's the point? So as they get property tax increases, rents do go up as a result. Another thing that this bill would do to help renters, obviously we're making first-time home ownership much, much more affordable, so we're going to look at a system now that's going to move more people from renting to the American dream of possibly owning your own home. So this bill does help renters. A bunch of different polls that were taken. I'm not going to go through all these in the essence of time. There have been polls from all the way back in 2013 all the way up to just this year, and all over the state, no matter where we look, when people hear about the details of this bill, they overwhelmingly support it by the margin of this one 78 to 22%. There's one here 89% to 7%. This one I will talk about just briefly. This was the Lehigh Valley Live, and it said, what's the best approach on school property taxes? And it gave adopt HB 76, kill the school property taxes and raise other taxes, and that got 70%, even when it was up against this other option of reduce school property tax significantly with more moderate increases in other taxes. That only got 20%. The voters clearly chose elimination over reduction by a factor of 70% to 20%. And this just goes kind of on and on and on through a bunch of different polls across the state. And we always hear, good luck, I hope you can do it, I hope you can do something about it. And we're asking you for your help in helping us get this across the finish line. As Dave mentioned earlier, it's really just a bunch of unpaid grassroots people up against some really well-funded lobby opposition. And it's been an uphill battle. So I'm just going to close with a few remarks here and hope that you like what you saw. The entire presentation is always about numbers because we have to discuss how are we going to do this? How are we going to replace your school property taxes? So we have to go through all of this boring presentation and let you know how this whole thing works. But what we always seem to forget about are some other issues, and that is the fairness of this bill, this tax, the immorality of this tax, and the inequity of the current tax. I have yet to hear anybody that opposes SB 76 to defend the current system or status quo in terms of fairness, equity, and, of course, stability for the homeowner. And in fact, what we usually hear is something like, well, we understand there's a property tax problem, but then after the but, they go on to criticize SB 76 because they don't like this about it, they don't like that, they don't like that we tax diapers or cash, whatever it is. But during these conversations, they always seem to ignore all of the problems with the current system. And during these conversations, we never hear what their idea is to solve the problem. All we hear is constant complaining about SB 76 because there's something about it that they don't like. I'm here to say, let's talk about what we don't like, but let's not just talk about that. Let's talk about solutions for a change. This is probably the third or fourth of these town halls, and all we've heard so far is opposition to what we don't like. Let's talk about what you propose as a solution if you oppose SB 76. There is no other tax like the property tax. What other tax do we have that taxes the same thing year after year, a tax that relentlessly rises at much faster rate than our income, a tax that results in us paying more in taxes over time than we did for the item itself, a tax that results in the school taking that item from you if you can no longer afford to pay. What else do we tax like this? Show me another tax that can literally leave you homeless. There isn't one. And continuing this injustice is absolutely unacceptable. Every other alternative idea to this archaic tax system that has nothing to do with our ability to pay is left firmly in place. Every other idea leaves the school property tax in place. Every other proposal that we've heard makes the problem even worse by shrinking the tax base even further, by offering only temporary relief or offering relief only to certain segments of society and taxpayers. Our special interest opposition has looked at this issue only from one perspective, and that perspective is their own. We're asking that we look at this perspective through that of the homeowner at this point. We need to begin looking at this from not only the perspective of the homeowner, but also the family, the student as well. We need to fund our public education system. We are not here trying to get out of paying our constitutionally obligated we are mandated to pay for public education. We are not trying to say we don't want to do this. We're simply saying that we don't want to use the school property tax, which is arbitrary and unfair, anymore to do it. We are actually saying, raise our other taxes. Go ahead and raise the PIT. Raise the sales tax and expand it to more items and services. Let's just get rid of the unfair school property tax system, because the property tax system cannot be replaced. That's why SB 76 exists in the first place. The school property tax must be completely eliminated. There is no other way. It's the only solution, and we're simply saying no tax should ever have the power to leave you homeless. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, David. We turn now for the panel. I'm going to ask each member up here to summarize their points in 2 minutes. We do 1/2 hour with the panel and then a half hour for public comment. And as David had indicated, we're focusing on different alternatives. If not 76, tell us what your alternative is, because as Ron had clearly pointed out, it's probably been since 1682, Ryan, that anyone has walked up and said, yeah, we have a perfect education system. Let's begin at the end of the table. Please identify yourself. Make sure you're using the microphone with it turned on, and then we'll go up and down the table.
All right. Good evening. I'm Mark Moan. I'm the chair of the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors Legislative Committee. I'm here today on behalf of our 30,000 members to voice our organization's support of Senate Bill 76. Our association is committed to real property tax reform in the Commonwealth. The Pennsylvania Association of Realtors believes Senate Bill 76 will protect seniors on fixed incomes and fairly tax consumers in a responsible way. Throughout the Commonwealth, rising school property taxes have made it difficult for homeowners to pay their taxes. By eliminating property taxes and replacing the funding with personal income and sales taxes, the burden of unreasonably high property taxes would be lifted from only homeowners and fairly spread among those who consume and earn the most. Over the past several years, we've heard countless stories from members throughout the state about homeowners unable to sell their homes because of high property taxes. Young families trying to purchase their first homes are pushed out of the market with property taxes that exceed their monthly mortgage payments. Here's just a couple of examples. A realtor from Carbon County told us he listed a home priced at $55,000, which is extremely affordable in most areas of the state. The monthly mortgage payment, principal and interest, would be $224, but the monthly escrowed property taxes exceed the mortgage at $260. So you're paying more for your taxes than you are for your principal and interest, making that property unaffordable to many young families. Monroe County homeowners struggle to find buyers for their homes as well. For example, a home priced at $177,000 in East Stroudsburg would have a monthly mortgage of $762, with monthly escrowed property taxes of $919, bringing the monthly payment to more than $1,600. And I could go on. There's many different examples where your annual property taxes for the life of your ownership of that home far outpaces your monthly costs for principal and interest on your mortgage. We believe homeowners throughout the Commonwealth are tired of losing their homes due to school property taxes. As a strong proponent of private property rights, the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors believes it is important to maintain an environment that is conducive to encouraging home ownership. Senate Bill 76 would make Pennsylvania a more attractive state for economic development and home ownership, and offers a fiscally responsible plan for property tax reform. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Tim Schramm I'm the business manager, CFO at Solanco School District, and I've also a past president of Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials. My background is in private sector banking before I went into the school district. My training was in business right here in Lancaster County, Elizabethtown College, Penn State MBA program, MA program, and then eventually into the academic world. I see a lot of overlapping circles tonight in terms of, I think, lots of goals to reduce property tax. I actually believe that the overbearing, over-reliance on property tax needs to be addressed. It actually should have been done about 20 years ago. We had some opportunities then. I worked as an analyst on some Senate Bill 1 things way back when. So while I agree the state needs to step up and mitigate this reliance, it needs to do so in a very orderly and well thought out manner. I love Senator Almond's 1692 starting point. I think if it started in 1692, then we should generally consider a good 3, 5, 8-year phase-in with some incremental approaches. No one knows what the results of shifting $28 billion, that's almost as large as our entire budget. You're going to take $14 billion in school taxes out, and you're going to bring $14 billion of new money in. You're actually moving $14 billion across the state. It will not happen in 2 years. That's my opinion. It's going to take much longer than 2 years for that to settle out. So not everyone can be a winner. I actually think, with all due respect to Charles Dickens, that it's like a big Jacob Marley chain that we would put on ourselves if we tried to force this through. So the issue is, I think it's the right thing to do. I think we need to push this down from the top. If you can picture a pyramid, you take the pyramid apart from the top. You don't pull out the base from underneath of it while you're standing underneath of it, which is exactly where we are. I'm glad we actually had some final comments on some students. The students really matter. There are many districts in this state from a lot of our academic work, particularly with William Penn Foundation and now the Temple Corp. We could very easily trigger 50 to 75, maybe even 80 districts into instant cash flow problems with a rush at this. So I think what we want to do is the proposals would be that easily, I see the math, that we could drop property taxes at a gross level 20–25% in one fell swoop. If you think about it with what's going on in the bills that were introduced at the very beginning of this process, those bills are showing you how that can translate to perhaps 50, 60, 70, 80% at a homeowner level. That 20%, how it's distributed, how it's targeted to income, how it's targeted to seniors and the demography across the state, that could instantly result over the next 2 or 3 years in an orderly, organized fashion, and then let the items that are going to occur with a $14–20 billion move across the state surface. It is much like our pension bills of 2000, which I was against back then. I was on record then, I'll state it again. This is much like our pension bill because once this is passed, it cannot be undone. There is no safety net. You're going to be walking on a wire across the Grand Canyon, and there's no going back. So the issue is, while homeowners may love it if it's passed and taxes go away, then what happens to the students, to those individual communities, to those school districts that cannot fund themselves, where property property values actually will not go up, not in those communities, that's for sure. The whole idea then is to how do we get there incrementally and do this in an orderly fashion so that you have a safety net underneath of you as you go. There's many ways to address that tax piece. And again, we talked about the targeting, homestead, farmstead, the bills that we just hear, the constitutional amendment that allows that, the targeting of the demography in terms of income and seniors. It also can be just flat across the board millage, which then helps everybody. So there's lots of way to target dollars coming at it, but exactly right with the presentation, where the overlapping circles, it must be a wide tax base, it must be personal income and sales, can't be sin taxes and all those kinds of things, because it has to be a stable base. So in terms of then moving forward, the disparate nature of the lock-in is something that we'll have to deal with. I don't want to get into too much detail there, but within Lancaster County alone, just locking in the state paying those property taxes back locks in a disparate funding to your schools of about anywhere between $100,000 to $180,000 per classroom. That's just in Lancaster County. Those disparate numbers are even higher in other areas. How we address that moving forward with a funding formula is critical. In terms of how we actually help students in those districts, the 3% increase that we were talking about in terms of 3% increase, the IFO reporting, remember that's a 3% increase on perhaps 20% of your funding. It might be a 3% increase on 80% of your funding. And if it's going to be a 3% increase on 80% of your funding, meaning you now are funded at 80% level with your property taxes, the top will run away from the bottom. This is the old HR deal where an HR director will not allow in their large company across the board raises to all of their staff because those at the top run away from the bottom. Act 1 has actually acted like that across this state because it was a cap of a rate. So if you had a low rate when you started Act 1 12 years ago, you can never catch the top. Again, looking at this funding bill and giving us time to implement from the top, work down from the top of that pyramid, and solve these intractable issues. To do a Big Bang Theory done, it is eliminated, pretty much throws this whole $14, $15, $20 billion problem right back on the General Assembly with no ability to ever use the property tax as a base to come back and look at things. So I would encourage us to move forward. I agree. We're at a point in time that I think something must be done. The state must reverse its trend of not funding more. It has to start to ramp that up. So I think it's a good time. I think it needs to be done. I think there's enough overlapping circles to get something done. But Big Bang Theory, once and done, that's not the answer from my opinion. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Darren.
Good evening. I'm Darren Euchre, Director of State Legislative Affairs for Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. Senators, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Pennsylvania Farm Bureau represents 62,000 members across the state. We're a general farm organization. That means we represent farms of every size and commodity, We too are a grassroots organization, meaning that our farmer members establish our policies. So it is their thoughts, their belief that drive our legislative efforts. And I can say with certainty that our members have long supported the idea of reforming the property tax system. We support replacing property taxes with a menu of other options, including increasing sales and personal income taxes. I think our farmers are in a unique position to talk about the need for property tax reform. Unlike any other business, farmers need substantial amounts of land to be able to make their businesses profitable. And it's an issue that crosses every commodity from dairy farms to apple orchards and everything in between. They need land to raise their crops, their livestock. And it is simply a core foundation of their business. Farmers rely on land, both owned and rented, to meet the basic needs of their business. And secondly, unlike any other business, farmers cannot pass on additional costs to consumers. Farmers are price takers, they are not price makers. So the yearly property tax hike has to be made up in other means. They cannot charge more for the grain, charge more for the milk, just because their cost of production has gone up. And for farmers, owning large amounts of land is not a measure of wealth. It is instead simply the nature of the business of agriculture. That's why we feel proposals like Senate Bill 76 present a more equitable solution for the question of school district funding. Thank you.
Thank you. My neighbor from Lebanon County, Senator Fulmer.
I'll be very brief. I do not want to contribute to global warming with unnecessary hot air. I'm trying to better my Sierra Club rating. But anyway, that aside, I became very passionate about 76 when I first got elected to this General Assembly back in 2006. I can't believe I'm there over 11 years already. I just don't believe, and I'm going to quote Article 1, Section 1 of our state constitution, the fact that we have an inalienable and indefeasible right to acquire, possess, and protect our properties. No tax should ever be able to leave you homeless, plain and simple. That should not ever happen. That is a crime. That is not what this nation was founded on. I also live in a third-class city called Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I live in the north side. And I could have moved out, but we stayed there. And I talked my 2 adult married children to stay there. And my now 9 grandchildren go to the Lebanon School District and stayed there. And we're trying to fight the fight, but we're losing the fight because of burdensome property taxes. I don't want renters. I want homeowners in the city of Lebanon. Homeowners create neighborhoods. Homeowners create a better, secure neighborhood and brings up the property values, not devaluates them. That will only help our school districts. Our teachers have to face students popping in and out of the classrooms at least 5 times, that same student in 1 year. This would secure this. This would help this by allowing people to be able to purchase and attract people back into the third-class cities. We got to stop shrinking the base. Folks, all this talk about, and I'm a gray-haired guy, so I got my AARP card, and I got my Dutchway Valley Shoppers, adult discount, 5%, super savers. And my wife, actually, we're starting to eat real early, so I don't know, our dinners are getting earlier all the time. But my point is that we got to stop shrinking the base. We're chasing young people away. And I believe one of the greatest dreams is to be able to own your home. You may not have money to go out to eat, you may not be able to do this or that, but at least you have some place to be. And then finally, folks, yes, I've been in the legislature for almost 11 years now. And I really feel like Bill Murray in the movie Groundhog Day. And I don't mean that to be snarky, I mean that sincerely. See those books up in the front there? When I was chair of the State Education Committee, we tried to fight for the elimination of some of the low-hanging fruits of these unfunded mandates that I believe choke our local school districts. Been fighting for 11 years to get rid of prevailing wage. so that we could have more money go into our classrooms rather than buildings that, or the cost of building those needed buildings, excuse me. But that's never going to happen. I believe that Senate Bill 76, and yes, there may be some risk. I understand that. But I honestly believe that this is a status quo changer. This will force our legislators, and sorry fellow members, but it will force us to start doing our job and start doing meaningful work that will be beneficial for everybody in the state. And that's why I'm for SB 76.
Thanks, Mike. He told me he didn't have anything to say, and then he comes off with an eloquent statement like that. Thank you, Mike. Shake my hand. There you go. Lisa.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Schaefer. I'm here on behalf of the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania on behalf of our 67 counties across the Commonwealth. I'd also like to say I grew up here just a few miles from here, so I'm very pleased to be home with you in Lancaster County this evening. Our counties also support property tax reform, but we've long advocated for a broader solution. Schools are not the only local government that levy a property tax. Our counties do as well. And in fact, the counties rely on the property tax for most of their local source of generated revenue. Like the school districts, more than 80% of our budgets are dedicated to services that we're mandated to provide, things like human services programs, drug and alcohol programs, mental health services, child protective services, our courts and correctional facilities, administering the election systems, emergency response plannings, and the list goes on. So we're really in the same boat as the school districts are. Now, with that said, at the last roundtable that we had here, I had raised this issue and had some agreement that yes, county property taxes should also be reformed, but we need to wait until after the school district property taxes get reformed. We understand that schools levy the biggest chunk of the bill. That's the biggest bill that you see in property taxes from all of your local governments. But at the same time, you've been hearing how bad the property tax is, how unfair it is, how inequitable it is, what a burden it is, how archaic it is. If it's all those things for schools to be relying on, it's all those things for all your other local governments to be relying on as well. And we believe that the school property taxpayer is not different from the county property taxpayer, from the sales taxpayer, from the income taxpayer. So we should be having a broader conversation, and it makes more sense to talk about this all together at one time. A couple of sessions ago, our counties have long advocated for options at the local level, to do a local option, because we understand the demographics and the economics are different across the state from region to region. And we went and we talked with legislative leaders about our proposals, and they said, well, we want to wait until after Senate Bill 76 gets done too, but because they were concerned that if we did an increase in the sales tax at the state level, there wouldn't be much of an appetite left to allow counties to do a local sales tax to offset their property tax burden at the local level. We've been talking about the history tonight of property taxes from 1692, and some of our even more modern efforts have been going on for 4+ decades. If we do school property taxes without talking about the rest of property taxes, how long will we have to wait to talk about the county property tax burden and the local government tax burden? Recently, the State Planning Board was charged to look at ways to revitalize communities, to look at economic development. And one of the recommendations they made to improve community economic development was to provide local governments with more local taxing options to reduce the over-reliance on property taxes. So again, our county governments also support property tax reform, but we hope that by being here tonight, we can also talk more broadly about what property taxes mean across the board for all of our taxpayers. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Rita?
Good evening. My name is Rita DeLego. I'm with the Pennsylvania Residential Owners Association. You may look at us as the landlords. Yes, our tenants pay the ad valorem real estate tax. We pass it on to them. The properties that I own, that I am paying the school real estate tax, it's a cost of doing business, and I must pass it on to them. So we are greatly concerned with a reform or a change in the school real estate tax, especially since many of our properties are being spot reassessed and being charged a higher real estate tax. This again gets passed on to the tenant. So please don't think that tenants are getting a free pass. They are not. One of our concerns with the increase in the sales tax and the services that we'll continue to use that will then be paying a higher tax, will we be able to reduce through the reduction in the school real estate tax enough to offset the increase that our tenants will be paying in their state income tax as well as the sales tax they'll be paying. It's a concern to us. We are looking long and hard at the numbers. Although I am a landlord and I am greatly concerned about tenants, I do not feel that our rental properties are a devaluation in many of our communities. We are necessary to the economy. We are necessary. Many of the millennials are choosing tenancy above home ownership. Yes, I do understand what we refer to as the American dream of home ownership. Folks, I'm also a real estate broker. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Dan. I'm sorry, Alex.
Good evening. My name is Alex Halper. I'm with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, and I want to thank you, Senator, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. The PA Chamber is the statewide chamber of commerce. We're a membership organization. Our members are employers of all sizes throughout all of Pennsylvania. We have over 9,000 members. And just like the business community in general in Pennsylvania, our membership is overwhelmingly small businesses. And many of those employers around Pennsylvania, just like many here in the room, have concerns and are frustrated with property taxes that are too high, property taxes that are increasing. That is something, without a doubt, we absolutely share and really want to focus on getting a handle on why that's occurring. But that really, we believe that really has to be the focus. Why are property taxes increasing, particularly in certain areas, but throughout the Commonwealth? Why are property taxes increasing on such a regular basis? It's already been discussed earlier this evening, the projections from the Independent Fiscal Office on how much property taxes could go up on an annual basis. We heard about $500 million. That is a daunting and troubling number for all of us. But simply shifting that increase onto other taxpayers, we don't believe at the PA Chamber that is really the appropriate solution. Small businesses pay on their business income at the personal income tax rate. So the proposal that was discussed earlier represents a pretty significant tax increase on Pennsylvania's small business owners. And if without getting a handle on those cost drivers, we believe we will put Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania's General Assembly in a position where they will be requiring tax increases every single year on Pennsylvania's small businesses, and we don't believe that would be in the best interest of the Commonwealth, of our ability to compete with other states. There are a number of initiatives that we support, that we've been engaged in, and we'd like to see advanced. A number of those proposals have been discussed already related to targeted approaches. If there are individuals around Pennsylvania, seniors, low-income seniors on a fixed income that are at risk of losing their home because of rising property taxes, we absolutely need programs in place that prevent that from happening. I could not agree more with some of the sentiments expressed earlier this evening that no one should get kicked out of their homes. We agree with you. It's frustrating that there are proposals like that actually put on the table, and we believe have an opportunity to move forward, but have not gotten to that point. And as we've seen over the past few years, especially, so much focus on this one individual proposal. So we stand ready to work with anyone interested in helping to control costs. I'm very proud of the record of my organization, the PA Chamber, over the years, in many cases leading the charge in Harrisburg to try to get cost controls within public education, whether it's within public pensions, prevailing wage reform. These are important priorities that we believe need much more focus, and we stand ready to work on that, as well as targeted approaches to assist individual Pennsylvanians as I described. So thank you again for the invitation to be here.
Thanks, Alex. Dan.
Good evening. I'm Dan Forey. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Hempfield School District and have been in that position for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I came from public industry. And I'm confused and amazed. I appreciate all the time spent here looking at the revenue side. I guess everywhere else except Harrisburg, we always look at revenue and expenses together, but somehow in Harrisburg you can pass one and not the other. I would challenge and really would like to see that binders something done. I'd love to see the same passion and the same energy. I do commend Senator Fulmer because I know he has tried to eliminate many of those issues that are out there. But I think one of the things that really is not fair to those out here is really not looking at both sides of the equations. It's interesting, and I appreciate Mr. Boltz's presentation. I can tell you that if I could use 2013-14 expenditures, we could have reduced property tax in our school district this year. So I'm not sure how using 2014 IFO to project what really is required to meet the revenue meets that. The other challenge and thing that I think about is I agree, the school district has very limited local control. And I think the issue is that we need to restore more local control, not eliminate it completely. I'll share a story from Hempfield. Hempfield, for over the last 10 years, has initiated a senior tax worker program. We have 153 seniors that participate in this program and have earned over $79,000 in tax credits this last year. They're excited about the program. 37 of those seniors actually donated to their folks that couldn't work. And why are they excited? Because they're in the school. They feel that they are contributing to those earnings, and they feel like they're a part of the system, and they understand that. I think that we also have processes in place through the homestead farmstead. If we're looking at the homeowners, then let's look at funding there. We've all heard the promise that farmstead homestead was going to save us all money. Those numbers haven't changed. Do we start and do we fix the process that are in place, or do we throw everything out and try and start all over again? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to note for the record, Dan, that two of the best kids in the world are now members at your local high school. It's my niece and nephew, and if I didn't say that today while I was here, I wouldn't be allowed to leave Lancaster County. Representative Zimmerman.
I actually like the name of his high school.
Yeah, I don't think I was actually listed on here, but thanks, Senator. Good to be here, and I'll just make a comment or two here. This whole issue is really not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's really more regional. Some of our areas that have had tremendous growth have also had higher increases in the property taxes, and then some of the areas that haven't grown so much haven't had quite the increase. So it's a little more of a regional issue than it is a Democrat or Republican issue. The other thing is this thing has really become a movement, and I think I get more emails and phone calls and the likes on this issue than most any issue that's out there. So it's a big issue. The district that I cover would be right in this area, New Holland, Ephrata, and the eastern side of Peckway Valley School District. So my comments tonight really are an encouragement to our school board members, our school administrators and the legislators to really sit down and talk about this, and let's get it figured out, because it's a movement. It's not going to stay the same. So let's figure it out and make some changes that we can work with and live with going into the future. So thanks.
Thank you for joining us. Joel.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Joel Sears, and I'm the president of the York County Taxpayers Council, which was one of the original members of PCTA. Small business, been in business 35 years, 20 years in the York area, and one that also served on a school board and tried unsuccessfully to run for state representative last year. So I can tell you for an absolute fact, property tax elimination was the #1 issue. I talked to 3,000 people, knocked on 10,000 doors. It's for real, folks. We are killing the state economically with these school property taxes. We are absolutely destroying our economy. Senator Argyle said something earlier, and I want to play on that for my few minutes. He talked about the system being rotten to the core, so I'm going to talk to you about the core. The core is the assessment system, and you guys are at ground zero. You just completed a countywide reassessment, probably spent $2 or $3 million, maybe more, to do that countywide reassessment. That's like an earthquake. We're supposed to get uniformity from a countywide reassessment. So what I've done for the last couple days, taking time off from my business, was to take a look at sample home sales, 15 in each of the 3 school districts that are represented here tonight, Peckway Valley, Solanco, and Hempfield. And I'm going to put a little chart up. This, I hope at some point, will be on the presentation. This looks like a seismograph. This shows the non-uniformity of the assessments before and after the assessment. Folks, this is a system that cannot be fixed. And this is the system that school taxes, county taxes, city taxes, and even in some cases fire taxes and others are based. It is an unconstitutional system. Delaware County in March of this year had a favorable ruling for 2 protesters whose assessments were ridiculous. They brought a case to the Court of Common Pleas and they won. Delaware County is now forced to do a countywide reassessment. They're going to do exactly the same thing Lancaster's done. They're going to try to fix the unfixable. There's a snapshot. Each of the panelists has a copy of these handouts. I'm not going to go through these things because they get a little heavy, but that's the kind of guy I am. I like to do the numbers. Just to cut to the chase, in the leading up to 2017, your assessments here in the county, in this little 45 sample here that we're looking at, had a variation of 82% of assessed value. In other words, the proportion of assessed value to sales value varied by 82%. It should have been roughly 67%, something called the common level ratio. They're all over the ballpark. Those of you that want to spend a few minutes after the presentation, I have some extra handouts. I have a sign-up sheet if you'd like me to send this stuff by email. I'm happy to do that. Then you can take a look at it for yourselves. The variation went down from 82% to 56.4. I believe the state accepts 15 as uniformity. In one of the school districts, the dispersion went from 16% to 36%. It actually got worse. So I'm going to kind of cut to the chase here and talk to you a little bit about your constitutional obligations, those elected officials here, and I was one. The first thing I did when I was a school board member was raise my right hand and swear to uphold and defend the Constitution. The uniformity clause is part of our Constitution, as is the requirement for the state to provide a system of education that is both efficient and thorough. That is not the responsibility of individual homeowners. It is not the responsibility of school districts to provide the funding. It's the responsibility of the state. We want our school districts to be well funded. We want our children to get the best education that's possible within the funding that's available. And when more funding is necessary, I believe we as taxpayers will do the right thing and will actually vote for those increases in EIT to fund those programs. I can also tell you that as a business owner, when the legislation was originally proposed, I would have actually ended up paying, as a small business, a net of $4,000 a year more in my total tax bill as a business owner and as an individual. I felt like it was the right thing to do, and I got on board because I thought the morality of it was more important than my pocketbook. And I've talked to thousands and thousands of people since then. That started in 2004, and I can tell you that most people, the vast majority of people, feel the same way. We have an indefensible, immoral, unfixable system. We have a solution in SB 76, and I hope you'll all think very seriously about contacting your legislators to let them know how you support it as well.
Thank you, Joel.
I'm going to take this off of paper because I'm not real good at going off the cuff. If I go off the cuff, 2 minutes isn't going to cut it. My name is Jim Rodkey, and I'm a homeowner. I'm also a husband, a father, and a grandfather. I also chair a citizens advocacy group in Lebanon County that works towards the restoration of the rights of property, to put those rights back where they rightfully belong with the property owner. Our organization supports the current legislation of HB and SB 76 and the elimination of the school property tax introduced through the Pennsylvania Taxpayers Cyber Coalition. My wife and I have been around this state on our own and with others for town halls similar to this. For the last 7 years, we don't get paid for what we're doing. We're not complaining that we don't. We don't expect. But we do this from an ideological point of view. We believe that the right to our homes is part of a sacred trust. We believe that government has a duty, an obligation to uphold and protect our rights to property, just as our Commonwealth Constitution states in Article 1, Sections 1, 8, and 10. Articles that I believe this current system of property taxation and the other systems like the assessment that have been put in place to maintain it are in violation of those sections of our Declaration of Rights in the United States, in the Pennsylvania Constitution. As my wife and I have traveled across the state, I've seen the face of property tax. I have talked to countless people where it's already too late to save their homes from the tax collector. I've talked to the countless more who are on the verge of losing their homes. I have talked to others who are sacrificing essentials like food, new clothing, and medications in an effort to hold on to their homes. I've talked to people who have been struck with a debilitating illness, and while they could have maintained their mortgage payments, the property taxes have stripped them or are in the process of stripping them from their homes. I've met with people who have struggled through the death of their spouse and now face the potential of losing their homes as well. Again, while they may be able to maintain the mortgage, the constantly increasing property tax makes staying in those homes impossible. And adding insult to injury, these people have heard it said of them, "You're losing your home because you bought too much house." I have talked to young people who want to buy a house and establish permanent roots in our communities. They tell me that while they can afford the mortgage, they can't afford the property tax, especially when they look down the road at future increases based on the historic pattern of increases in the property tax. I have talked to veterans who have sacrificed for this nation, who are struggling to hold on to their homes. I have talked to others who, in part because of the private property tax climate in Pennsylvania, have seen their jobs stripped out from underneath them, who are forced into lower-paying jobs to provide for their families. And again, while they may be able to keep up with the mortgage payments, the property taxes are stripping their homes away from them. I have talked to others who tell me that they haven't seen wage increases in 10 years, who have seen their home values decrease while their property taxes keep increasing at rates that they simply can no longer sustain. I have seen blight with homes because of the constant increases in property taxes, contributing to an inability to necessarily maintain their own homes. I live in a community where I've seen firsthand overcrowding in apartment buildings because the impact of the increases in property taxation is making rent unaffordable to families who must then double up in their homes to meet the cost of that rent. This is not just a senior problem. The disease of the property tax reaches out to touch all ages, from our children to our grandchildren. And are we going to continue to ignore them just to protect the status quo? Do we continue to accept this twisted logic that 10,000 people losing their homes each year is not significant enough reason to replace what has been proven time and time again to be broken and irreparable? Isn't more than 45,000 residents, that's one every 11.5 minutes from July of 2015 to July of 2016, fleeing from this state to escape the tax burden, enough evidence to us that we can no longer maintain the status quo? If not, what more is it going to take? We sit here and we listen to this blame game. And there always seems to be someone else to blame for raising the taxes on our home. And I guess there's plenty of blame to go around, except for one group: the homeowner. The homeowner can't be blamed. It's not our fault for the mess that's been created. We didn't create this mess, and yet when you strip away all the rhetoric, it is the homeowner who will be held accountable. And that accountability extends to this egregious notion that either we pay for the ability of others to legally plunder our homes or we will lose it. How is this not, as Frederick Bastiat declared, legal plunder? How is this not extortion? How is this an acceptable way of doing business in Pennsylvania? If we can't fund education without denying the right of home ownership to those who could, through their own labor and industry, otherwise afford to do so, then we have a very, very serious moral and ethical problem in Pennsylvania. That has to change. We must all be accountable to each other in the funding of education in a way that is fair and equitable to all. And the only way to accomplish that, is through the complete elimination of a tax that violates our right to property, the very homes that we live in.
I'm going to turn now for final statements from the authors of the legislation, Ron and David. We turn then to public comments, and I'm going to give the two senators the final word. How's that for a deal? David, Ron.
Well, thanks, Jim, for making me have to go right after that. Thank you so much for that impassioned. This is what it's all about, folks, and I'm proud to say Jim is a very close friend. That's why he's here. I'd just like to just address some of the things that were said on the panel. Mr. Forey, I believe was from Hempfield. Thank you for being here and participating. I might be wrong in the name, I'm not sure. You mentioned that the numbers in the presentation were based on 2013 figures. That is absolutely incorrect. The 4.95% PIT rate is based on current replacement of school property taxes, not 2013 levels. In fact, back then when this report was done, they have not done one since. That's why we have to keep using the 2013 version. The PIT rate was 4.34. It had to be increased to 4.95, which kind of proves the point that I was talking about in the slideshow, that time is limited, folks. The more we keep waiting with that $500 million per year annual increase, the PIT is just going to have to keep going up and up and up. So I just wanted to point out that the figures I'm giving you tonight are current. They are not based on 2013 information. Alex, thank you for being here as well. I think we actually have a lot in agreement. He mentions the cost controls. I don't think there's a disagreement on that other than the way we go about doing it. We just simply, the folks that support 76 just simply believe that continuing to do what we've been doing for decades and advocating for, more and more spending controls from Harrisburg or cost drivers actually is probably a better way to put it. We just feel that's been unsuccessful. We feel that our homes, as we continue to do this decade after decade, year after year, our homes are remaining on the auction block while we're begging for cost controls. We simply think that, all right, we've had enough. We've had enough. If you're not going to do it on your own, we're going to enact spending controls and force you to do the cost control. So I think there's actually a lot of agreement there that we have with the chamber. It's just the disagreement lies with the method of achieving what we're all trying to do here. Alex, you mentioned the shifting, that this is a shifting, but the worst case scenario here really is, even if we don't get the cost controls that I believe that we're going to get in 76, you're still benefiting by, at least we're shifting to a broader base of people, and we're shifting to two revenue sources that, again, I'm going to say again, increase naturally over time without the need for constant rate increases, unlike the property taxes. Excuse me. So even if I'm wrong, even if this doesn't force Harrisburg to go down the road of cost controls, it's still a much better way to fund public education, and it's much more fair. And of the targeted relief that he and others have mentioned, I would just say that, again, that just creates more winners and losers. If we're just going to allow government to look and say, well, you deserve relief and you do, but not you, you, and you, but you, and you are going to pay for the relief for the others that we deserve, that we believe deserve it. When are we going to get enough of this game? When are we going to get enough of Harrisburg picking the winners and losers and other people having to subsidize other people's taxes? We're simply saying, let's treat everybody exactly the same way, fairly. Everybody pays the 1.88%, everybody pays the sales tax. Everybody contributes to public education on an equal level, from the east to the west of the state, from the north to the south. So I'd just like to mention that. And the last thing I'd like to say is, Mr. Schrum, I actually expected something different from you, and I'd like to thank you for being here as well and participating in the conversation. Unless I was hearing something different, I didn't actually hear an outright rejection from you for school property tax elimination. I'm not going to ask you in case I do get that rejection now. I don't want to take that. But I heard possibly a 3 to 5 to 8 year phase in. At least that's a basis to start a conversation. And I just wanted to mention that I really appreciate you coming out and mentioning that. The only things that I would disagree with you is, or actually not even disagree so much, but address, you mentioned the inequities, and as I brushed by it earlier in the presentation, I did so because I knew it would come up in Q&A, as it always does. SB 76, he's absolutely right. Our current system does have a lot of inequities in it as far as per pupil spending in our public education system. You can have some schools spending $25,000 or upwards, and some schools spending maybe less than $10,000 per student. But this is the result of the property tax. The property tax causes these inequities in the first place. And the reason is because some districts have the ability to raise a lot of revenue locally, others don't. That's why on the state subsidy side, the money is driven out through a formula that is inequitable. SB 76, while it does not fix that problem, there was never a goal to fix that problem. Previous versions did try to address that, but that, as you can imagine, just interjects all kinds of other political arguments, who gets what, and so we just said, all right, we're not going to attempt to fix that. We'll leave that up to the legislature to do after 76 passed. Our goal now is to just simply eliminate the school property tax as the way of funding public education. But the benefits that 76 brings in terms of inequities, while it does not directly fix the problem, what it does do is it sort of locks them in, so now we can at least address it. Maybe the legislature could come up with a new funding formula on the state subsidy side. Maybe they could come up with a more equitable way to distribute this money rather than a dollar for dollar after. Whatever they decide to do, we're not fixed. We're not fixed in this system. We can address the inequities, but we can only address the inequities with the removal of the local revenue, which is the local property tax. So I think if we look at it from that angle, I think that you would see that this is actually a benefit to addressing the inequities, not a hindrance, but a benefit. It doesn't do it immediately, but it does lay the groundwork and does lay the foundation to at least look at it in a meaningful way going forward. Thank you very much.
All right, the discretion of the chairman here, we're getting really close to our 9 o'clock bewitching area at that time, and several of us have pretty long distances, but I'm going to allow a limited number of 2-minute statements. If any of you have a question from the public or a statement, don't tell us something that we've already heard 5 or 10 or 15 times, but if there's anything out there that you're burning to know about this bill or that you don't believe has been made clear, now is your chance.
On the school board for Conestoga Valley. Thank you for all of you who serve and work to control and address this issue. My largest concern is a concern more as a parent and for my posterity and for the future of the Commonwealth, because I believe in the principles of the free market and of wealth creation. I believe what Margaret Thatcher said when she said we cannot tax our way into prosperity. And when we talk about, Senator Fulmer mentioned not decreasing the base, but SB 76 does decrease the base because only a small amount of people in the state pay income tax. And that small amount of people are going to bear the burden that is now shared between retired people, businesses, and the working people. So the means of production, the people who are going out and making a living today, are going to pay a large portion of this tax shift because we're not spending any less money. And I believe that is going to be detrimental to our state. I moved here from Texas 9 years ago. My tax bill went up about 30% moving to this state from Texas. We tax our people way too much, but the solution is not to place that burden squarely on the part of this demographic that is moving out of the state based on your own slides and asking them to pull the weight of the entire state of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you. And a note for the record, there have been many different iterations of this legislation from way before it became 76. There were those who said put it all on the income tax. There were all those who put it, say no, no, no. I think Ron had mentioned put it all on the sales tax. The current version is a compromise including both, and we didn't even talk about the gaming dollars, but go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Frank J. Doutrick. I'm from Columbia Borough. In hearing everything about HB 76, what do we have to do, or can you do this to put it on the ballot? What needs to take place?
I think I can answer that one without even trusting my my well-reasoned staff. Under Pennsylvania law, and my constitutional expert, sorry, it's been a long night, is to my right. In some states, you would have initiative and referendum. All you would have to do is go out, collect enough signatures, boom, it would go on the ballot. We do not have that here. We do have, however, as John had indicated, a provision that has been approved by the House and Senate 2 times that will be on the ballot this fall that will allow for the legislature, for the first time in history, if passed, to go toward a 100% maximum homeowner only. Right now, because of the uniformity clause, we can't do that. So the long answer to your question, the short answer to your question is there is no immediate way to get 76 to the ballot. There is, however, a way that we believe may help 76 pass in the future. That's on the ballot this fall, and you will be seeing a lot more about that in the newspapers in the weeks to come.
So when the people go to the polls, they wouldn't be voting on the true 76.
Correct. They're changing a piece of the Constitution that will allow us to pass a different version of 76 in the future than we are currently allowed to consider.
Okay. Just a little story. In going to Costco's 2 weeks ago, I went back to the water department, and there was a gentleman there in a little cart, and he was struggling to get out of the cart, so I asked him to sit there. I would put his water in his basket for him. So in talking to him, of course, taxes come up. He said, I would be willing to pay, this is the way he said it, a couple pennies more in buying goods just so I can stay in my house. It just made me feel.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes. An issue.
We're out of time.
Okay,
We've
just
gotta- okay.
one other issue I'd just like to get across. A thing that I would like to get across is I go to a lot of school board meetings. I go to a lot of borough council meetings. I see elected officials, I see appointed officials don't have a clue on what they're voting on. They're in charge of millions of dollars. And when you want to know how we got in the situation we're in, believe me, folks, I sit there and I cringe. Somewhere along the line, Harrisburg legislators need to make it mandated that appointed and elected officials serve a certain amount of time to get this knowledge to talk about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's only fair we get the half hour like.
I understand. We're doing the best we can here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are a lot of public hearings that don't allow any public comment, so we're doing the best we can. Go ahead. Next, please.
Good evening. My name is Rodney Jones. I'm from the Eastern Lancaster County School District, where for the past 7 years I've been the vice president of the school board. And I'd like to say thank you for everyone coming to share this information with us so we can make an informed decision. And I agree with this last speaker that all elected officials, regardless of what position they hold, should have some type of test that they need to take, because I'm sure there's someone better than I am to be a school board member. But anyway, I am a school board member. So a couple of things. One, Senator Allman, I appreciate you referencing 1692. You had sent me a letter several weeks ago, and it was very well written and eloquent, and it made me at that time think of Winston Churchill when he made the comment about democracy. So perhaps our property tax is something like democracy in the eyes of Winston Churchill. I have a hard time thinking in 200 years that smarter men and women than us haven't been able to solve this problem. I would personally like to see us tackle prevailing wage tax before this issue. And I really want to say thank you to Mr. Strom. I like this idea of this slow phase-in. I think it's a very good idea. I'm a little alarmed when you said, Senator Argall, that we're going to vote this November on a bill that we don't know about.
We know about it.
But you said it wasn't this bill. It's going to be a bill that comes later.
It's not, no. We've changed, and there are handouts here tonight, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the next 2 months. We know exactly what the wording on the ballot is going to be. We're changing just a couple of words in the state constitution. The only way to do that is through passage of the House and Senate twice and approval of the voters. Once the voters approve the change in the Constitution, then that allows the legislature for the first time to consider other options that we have not been able to consider before.
Vote.
Yes.
Okay, and then I'd just like to close by using some words from Mr. Bolts, when he said if we had local control, we wouldn't have the pension problem that we have now. And so I appreciate that. And what you're doing, even though we have this, you're taking another step of local control away from us. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Very much. And he'd referenced Winston Churchill. And I have to, for those of you that don't know the exact quote, and I'm going to mangle it, it essentially, Winston Churchill's famous quote about democracy is that it's the worst form of government ever devised by man, except for all the others. Okay, so now you know. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Jeffrey Cutler, and I want to applaud the comment that the assessment process is the real problem. The actual assessment of in the taxes is the true problem with what's going on. The uniformity clause says all taxes should be uniform. And two houses right next to each other, regardless of what's going on, should have the same taxes. So the entire system of an assessment by value is wrong. So if you just simply change it to an assessment that said by type, a bedroom of such 900 square feet is 900 square feet, a livable space. the assessment would be uniform in the same properties with the same blueprint. No difference between them statewide, one rate. The second thing is your bill does nothing to expand getting more money. One of the problems you have is the exemptions for other people. And I had actually proposed a system that allows the state to get extra money from something I nicknamed a Jeffy bond. And it's kind of complicated to explain here, but it's actually filed in federal court, and I actually copyrighted it on December 7th, 2015. And what it allows the state to do is produce extra money that nobody else is talking to. I went in front of the CV school system, East Lampeter Township, the Lancaster County Commissioners, and brought up this system. It's filed in case 2:17-00984. Have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Don Rank. I'm chairman of the Township Supervisors of Paradise Township, one of the 3 townships in Pequea Valley School District. And my question is the system that's used to appraise properties for school taxes is also used by townships, boroughs, and counties. So it can't be eliminated. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. There were several speakers who said we're going to eliminate it.
Eliminate school property taxes.
Okay. So it doesn't eliminate the appraisal process and all of the system that's out there for it.
Correct.
Therefore, I'm a numbers man. I like numbers that say number 7, for example. Couldn't we reduce the property taxes by 1/3 for 7 years and substitute the other taxation, which would then tell us who are the winners and who are the losers? There's going to be some get hit harder and some get a windfall. Then in 7 more years, in 14 years, implement the 2/3. And in 21 years, it would then eliminate the problem of generational difference. That wasn't addressed. The generation who has now paid all this property tax is now going to get hit with all this income and sales tax.
The one concern, and as I indicated earlier, I wasn't there in 1692, but I was there during the Casey administration when Governor Casey had a proposal to partially decrease school taxes, permanently increase other taxes. It had to go on the ballot. It was a constitutional amendment. It was the worst defeat for a constitutional amendment in the history of Pennsylvania because the people fear if you don't eliminate the school property tax, it comes back and bites you, and in a few years you're paying higher taxes on both. So it's possible you could do that, but you would need to prove to the public beyond any reasonable doubt that elimination is really meaning elimination, because I think John and Ron had indicated some polling results that when people have a choice between elimination and a partial decrease, they go for elimination every time.
But that's
Common sense.
elimination just for school tax,
Yes.
not for the other taxes.
And John's giving me the timeout here.
Yeah.
But the concern is, and again, I think each of my colleagues from the Senate had indicated that we rarely get complaints about township taxes. We sometimes get complaints about county taxes, not very often. We hear about school taxes every single day.
But we'll have to maintain the expensive system of appraisals
Yes.
and all of that for these little taxes, which loads a lot of the cost onto them, us then.
Yeah,
So,
I got you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Brian Hauer. I live in New Holland Borough, and I am a school teacher at the School District of Lancaster at McCaskey High School. I want to clear up something. First of all, I agree with the gentleman from Solanco and the gentleman from Hempfield, because I think we need a gradual thing to pull the rug out from school districts and not, you could have problems like you did in 2000. But you made a comment about getting a 3.5% raise. I'm a school teacher that in the paper it said we got a 3.5% contract each year. I have not seen a 3.5% raise in my 20 years of teaching. and we don't. People have to understand that is on the pot of money. I know you understand that. If it's $10 million, that's cheap. We know that of their payroll. Then 3.5% on that pot of money that's paid out to all their teachers is then, so that would be what, 350,000, let's say, if you're doing a quick thing, 350,000. So that is spread out over the 100 teachers or whatever they have. I do not make a 3.5% raise. I got a 1.3% raise last year. So that is not correct when you say we are getting that much money.
That's not what I said.
You said you'd like to get a 3.5% raise.
I said, no, sir. You're taking offense to a statement that meant nothing of what you're trying to allude that I said. I wasn't putting down, I didn't even mention teachers' raises. I simply said that the replacement revenue for property taxes would go up 3.12 to 3.3 per year. The taxpayers are paying that, 3.2 to 3.3. I simply said that I didn't get a 3.2 to 3.3% raise.
I apologize for that, but what I want to miss, the pension problem is the legislators and the school district's fault for not paying their fair share. I've paid 7.5% of my income for 20 years. New teachers pay 10% of their income into the system. It got this problem that we have now because the legislators, and I know Senator Altman agrees with that, and he says that when he's out in public, and I appreciate that it's not our fault. It is the legislators and the school districts that did not pay their fair share.
Now we have to fix it. Yeah. No, you're right. Go ahead, please.
Thomas Seth, Gap, Pennsylvania. One thing I haven't heard addressed at all by anybody in expenses I think we have to look into is with all these senior citizens who are being displaced from their home, where are they going to live? The county home, the state home? We've got probably the 5th oldest population in the nation, and it's only going to get worse. And that's going to become a tremendous expense. And you know who's going to be paying for that? Every one of us sitting in this room. Next thing I'd like to address is, yes, when our mortgages go up, it goes up more than the 3% or more than what the school board tells us. The business passes that expense on to us. Business pays no taxes. We pay their taxes when they increase their expenses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Andrea Stolnecker, Lebanon. I'm a small business owner, Mr. Halper. I'm a small business owner, but unfortunately I had to close my brick and mortar store last year. For what reason? Well, Ms. Delago, you know about it, rent. My rent was going up a minimum 10% a year, and it wasn't because I was using 10% more electric or 10% more water, it's because of the property taxes. So had we not had to keep paying more for the rent on the store, I probably would still have it now. In addition, my husband is disabled, which means, you know, that's a fixed income. That very rarely increases. But yet our property taxes are going up every year. Our property taxes now are more than what our mortgage is. And it has been that way for quite some time. Now, due to the fact that my husband is disabled, we have applied for the rebate, and we have gotten that. That's $500 a year, but that hardly offsets anything. Not to mention, anytime we get a rebate, every one of you under 65 or not disabled, you're paying for my rebate. It's still got to come from somewhere. We've also gone through the assessment, and we got our assessment lowered just last year. And all that did was just level everything off because of the increase that hit them. So our reduction didn't reduce anything. It just kept us status quo, and status quo is not cutting it anymore. And then the first lady who came to the podium, you made a mention about not everybody pays the earned income tax. Well, that would be me, my husband. That's very true. However, if we can get these property taxes eliminated and get ourselves another, $350 a month back in our pockets, I guarantee we'll be spending that, and that'll be made up then in the sales tax.
Thank you. Sir.
Good evening. My name is Bryant Ferris, and for the past 14 years, I've had the honor of serving the community here by serving on the Pequay Valley School Board. I thought it was appropriate that I might welcome everybody here this evening and thank you all for coming out. Pequay Valley, you might not know, is a very special place. It's a very unique place. By state standards, by our land, we're looked at as a very rich school district. However, in the county, we have the third highest percentage of free and reduced lunch students. We have combated a lot of this by working together as a community with our churches, our administration, our professional staff, and our community have come together to serve our learners. We've been recognized nationally as a U.S. World News Report Silver School. We have been recognized locally just recently. We currently, I'm going to brag a little bit, we hold the STEM Elementary Teacher of the Year, the STEM Secondary Teacher of the Year, and the STEM School of the Year in IU 13. Thank you. I've had 14 years of some great memories here at Pequay Valley, and 14 years of some great frustrations. And standing that close to that is giving me the willies right now. Your presentation tonight, Mr. Bowles, was very compelling. And I think it's tough to argue with the fact that we have a system that needs to be fixed, and I think this goes a long way. But there are some concerns because there are other things that need to be fixed. You know, we got here because, and again, I might not agree with your premise of school district reckless spending or excessive spending or whatever your quote was. Yeah, well, I appreciate that, not painting all 500. I'm hoping you'll give me a little leeway because of my Pequay Valley commercial. But, you know, the pension problem, again, you said don't repeat what we've heard, but that is an issue. You know, when I first came onto the board here, I think it was somewhere around 9 or 10%. We're up over 32.5% this year on that. We're actually, yes, 36 plus next year. Every time they say we're going to get to a plateau, we don't. That needs to be fixed. I know that it's going to take some courage because I know that there's a distinct line on this, but every time we do a building project, we have to add 20 to 30% prevailing wage. That needs to be fixed. These are all issues that are going to continue regardless of what happens with this bill, and that needs to be fixed, or the 3.2% provided by that line is not going to cut that. And I guess just maybe in closing, you know, it does sound great in theory. The devil is always in the details. And again, I keep pointing at that and saying that, you know, my concern as a school board member is what happens on the distribution end, what bureaucracy is put together to distribute this, and then how many more of those books are going to come at us and be told that, well, if you don't comply with that, we're going to withhold all your funding. So I think these are things that really should be addressed. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
We have two more, and these will be the last two that we, or do I, yes.
My name is Ken Yoder. I live in East Lampeter Township. I see one missing piece in the revenue part of this bill, SB 76, and that's the gold mine this state is sitting on, and that's the natural gas. I heard nobody mention anything about a extraction tax to help fund this bill and also fund the state. This state has lost billions of dollars by implementing this impact fee instead of a severance tax fee.
Thank you. Sir?
Good evening. I agree with you 100%. We need to fix these school taxes because myself personally, I'm going to sell out. I'm going to move out if something ain't done about it. But the one thing that really ticks me off, everybody wants to cut prevailing wage. I work for a construction company just about 5-10 miles from here. Anybody here want to come grab a shovel and say how much that job's worth? Is it worth minimum wage? Can you get work done like this? Look how beautiful that woodwork is right there. You want to pay somebody, you think somebody minimum wage can do that? You've got to pay for skilled labor to get that done. I just cut out an article out of the newspaper today. I was going to take it to work tomorrow. They're saying we can't get people to do this kind of work. We don't have enough skilled labor. President Trump wants to do the highway bill. I worked highway construction all my life. We set 210 bridge beams last year. A lot of them over 100 ton, the majority of them over 100 ton apiece. And you want somebody minimum wage out there on that thing like that. Don't cut the wages of the people that do fine work like that. We need these skilled wages. We need these skilled people. We need more vocational training to get these skilled people. It just ticks me off because we got guys that drive over 2 hours in a day, and I just drove past the guys on 41 up here getting the bridge deck ready to pour so they can get that bridge opened up. They worked all day yesterday in the rain just to go be able to get that bridge poured. They're going to pour the bridge deck tomorrow night, or they're pouring the bridge deck right now, I think it is.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Senator Ament.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for this discussion this evening. You know, in the time I've been in Harrisburg, I've regularly had conversations with my colleagues that Lancaster County is a very special place. And just by the nature of this conversation, how this conversation was held this evening, this is a passionate subject. This is a topic that people are very passionate about, people can get very angry about. I've been at events that have not been near this civil on this topic or other issues that are or similar issues to this. And I can't say enough how proud I am of the conversation that we've had here this evening. There's a lot of area of common ground here. You know, it's been mentioned throughout the presentation this evening, some of the economic challenges that Pennsylvania faces. I'm the parent of a 7-year-old, nearly a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And I want for my children what I suspect everyone in this room wants for their children and their grandchildren, and that is for them to be able to experience economic opportunity here in Pennsylvania, for them to have more doors of opportunity open to them, not less, to be able to experience more individual freedom and not less, to be able to attend good schools, high-performing schools, not poor-performing schools, to be able to experience upward economic mobility. I trust that you want those same things for your children that I do, and the reality in Pennsylvania today is that our workforce participation rate lags behind the national average, our employment rate lags behind the national average. We are losing population of those of prime working age. We're an aging state. Those of prime working age between the ages of 24 and 59, that demographic is projected to lose population between now and 2022 in real numbers by 105,000. That's going to have a tremendous impact on the revenue as well as the expenditure side of the ledger. And so what I appreciate tonight is that we've had a thoughtful conversation that is phenomenally important to residents of Lancaster County, residents all across this state. And I think we've done it in a manner in which we've not lost sight of providing a high-quality education to our kids, ensuring that we have a state where entrepreneurship and economic opportunity thrives, a state where individual freedom thrives, and home ownership, the dream of home ownership, can be a real viable option for all of our citizens. And so thank you so much for the feedback that you provided. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us this evening. And certainly Scott and I, Senator Argyle, Senator Fulmer, and a number of our colleagues in the state Senate are committed to advancing this issue in the very near term. Thank you very much.
This is a great opportunity to hear a lot of diverse viewpoints on the issue at hand, and I don't think there's anybody in this room that does not think that this is a very complicated issue. Start off, when you look at those manuals right there, these are issues, and there's a bill to try to address almost every single one of those things, and there has been for a long time, but we can't back down from trying to fix that and the things that we put on our school districts that drive cost. I told you a story when we started here about a young man who's faced with losing his home. We cannot just walk away from that either. I brought up an issue about trusting where your money's going. You know, you know, being a former county commissioner used to be a passion of mine when we were doing human services and other things. Here we have Lancaster County, which is one of the top 5 tax-generating counties in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But when it came back to dollars that were returned for crucial services, drug and alcohol, how important is that right now? Children and youth, behavioral health and developmental services, we were historically in the bottom 5% of dollars that come. So, of course, we can never back down from ensuring that the more money that Harrisburg has control over to ensure that the fair funding is coming back to each and individual county. It's critical. People talk about the new funding formula. We all know that's on new money moving forward. We've kind of institutionalized the inequities in the past. That won't be fair in terms of how we deal with our kids and educating them and how we get the money out. So we have to address that piece as well. That politics of that wasn't part of this bill, but it's almost like you can't ignore one without talking about the other, because there is going to be a drastic control mechanism from one entity to the other. So my biggest thing, though, well, I'm going to say 2 things. I heard the word targeted a lot. And I'll tell you what, it's the one thing I've learned from going from being a county commissioner to being up in the state legislature is, boy, do they specialize in picking winners and losers up there, folks. Big time. A lot of folks don't know this, but, you know, agriculture is very, very big in Lancaster County. Some folks, you know, we preserve a lot of farms. A lot of folks know, you know, we could be freezing the millage rate on farmers in Lancaster County. Why didn't we do it? When you squeeze one side of the balloon, guess what? It expands over here. And not to offend any senior citizens in the room or any farmers in this room at all, but to go down the path of picking more winners and losers, who's the tax burden going to fall on if you're giving tax breaks here? Someone else is making up the difference. It's our kids, it's our grandkids who are all picking up that. And we have to get away from a system that picks winners and losers. It's just not fair for our economy. It'll cause the flight of more people, and we have to address that. But more critically, and I commend Senator Argyle and Senator Fulmer, you know, not too long after realizing there was not enough votes to move forward, it convened a meeting of people who really care about this issue. And reality is, what does it take to get to the vote counts that we've all been talking about? And it may take some changing. It may take some addressing of various issues. I mean, heck, there's some days I'm going to throw my hands up in the air and say, you know what? I don't want the future of the people of Lancaster County being determined by people in other counties not even close to here who may not like that idea. So, and they're going to laugh when I say this, said, how about giving certain counties the ability to do it? As mentioned in history here, that used to be a part of discussion. I would love if the county collected the school taxes, and guess what? The county devised the formula to keep its money back in its own community. And that would really get rid of the unfair inequities and shifting monies back and forth. But the bottom line is this, where things currently stand, we don't have enough votes. So what can we do to draw in all the concerned entities to say, you know what? We're all going to give a little bit or maybe move out of our comfort zone, but to do what we need to do to provide the relief that needs to occur. And so I look forward to working with everyone as we move forward. This has been a great dialogue, and you know, trust me, after having a town hall down in Solanco, I'm sorry about that, Tim, where we had to shut it down because of people's behavior, I appreciate the fact that I saw people clapping, people that didn't necessarily agree with them, and that's the way things should be. I want to thank Peckway Valley for hosting this. You did a great commercial for the school. And let's keep the issue and the topic, no matter what your perspective is, in the forefront of our conversation, and hold people like myself and my colleagues accountable to let's get action done on it. So God bless you all. I hope you have safe travels. And again, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Senator Argyle.
You bet. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Ryan. John tells me that in addition to the people that were here tonight, we had thousands of people watching on Facebook. I'm not really sure how that works, but I'll trust him that that's possible. You know, this issue, and Mike and Scott and Ryan, I mean, we wouldn't have been here without you. they have been very helpful in moving this issue forward. As was indicated, last year we came so close, a 24-24 vote for the first time in history, although, Ryan, with your historical research, maybe you better double check that and make sure I'm accurate all the way to the 1690s. But, I mean, if the Lieutenant Governor would have voted with us on that day, we would have gotten to this to the House and Senate. But at the risk of offending my mother, the retired educator, we ain't giving up. We stand adjourned.
Let's show that